Hello, everyone. Glad to see you all again. This is our last lesson, the fifth one. And thanks for hanging in there. It's been a bit of a journey. I think I've thrown a lot of information at you. And I guess I'll take this a moment here just to reiterate the fact that this 5-hour course served mostly to help you understand the structure of what you need to know for beekeeping, the main issues, and knowing better what questions to ask now and where to get that information. So at this point, after today's lesson, you should feel confident in knowing what the next steps are to get going, what you have to do, and to move forward. Because the biggest barrier to moving forward with beekeeping is just, how do I start and what do I have to do? So I'm hoping we've overcome that barrier. So today's lesson is focusing on winter preparations. The last time we looked at extracting the honey. That was the best time of the year when you're taking all your honey off the hives, you're bringing it to the honey house, which could be your kitchen. If you just have one hive, it could be the kitchen, and then bottling it and selling it. Now it's the end of the season. We're worried about, my bees, will they survive the winter? If they don't, I'll have to start all over again with a new colony, a new nuke. So let's see what we can do. And also, you'll have a lot of free time in the winter. It's the best time to improve your knowledge and be even more ready for the following season. So let's get going. Make sure we have everybody on here. Oops, here's oh yeah, we did this. Okay, so today we'll be covering the following topics. How to reduce the risk of winter loss. And we'll talk about insulation, wrapping your hives, and cleaning your equipment, and learning. So let's get right into it. The first, a big issue when you're talking about beekeeping is winter loss. The beekeepers on the social media platforms and magazines will always talk about winter loss. They come March, April, that'll be the talk. Oh, how many hives did you lose? What percentage of hives did you lose? And people who have lost no hives will be boasting about that. And some people will say, wow, I lost all my hives. I lost 6 out of 6 or 4 out of 5. And it's always all winter long. I have nightmares. I have nightmares in the winter of my bees. My hives are all open in the middle of winter, and the bees are still there, but they're slowly dying. It's a tragedy. It is a nightmare. So in reality, these are the numbers in Ontario from 2007 to 2020 on the percentage colony loss reported. These are reported by beekeepers themselves. So it varies between as low as 15% in 2012 to as high as 35% in 2008. Now, I don't recall, I wasn't here for those winters, but perhaps you recall those were particularly hard winters. I don't know. But those numbers can be, I think they're a bit misleading because it's self-reporting and not everyone reports. So it's unclear if these numbers reflect the actual loss, or they could be skewed. Perhaps beekeepers who've lost hives will have a greater tendency to report, whereas those who haven't will not. We don't know this for sure. So you have to take these numbers with a grain of salt. But generally, I think it's fair to assume that of a 20% winter loss, looking at everything is probably something you'll have to expect. So if you've got 5 hives, you should lose 1 on average. 10, you should lose 2. And if you lose any more than that, if you're losing 30, 40, 50% of your hives, then you have to start asking yourself, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Because you can do everything right and still lose some hives. But if you're losing a huge number of hives, you may be doing something wrong, and this is something you need to look at. So we'll look at that. Also, when you're asked by the Ontario Beekeepers Association to answer their surveys about winter losses, they'll ask you, well, why did you lose them? And frankly, it's not always that obvious. You can come up to your hives in March or April and they're all dead, and it's not clear why they're dead. So the answers to this question also, I find, are, you have to take with a grain of salt. So here we have a whole bunch of possible reasons. Starvation. Well, that's pretty obvious, I suppose. If you open up your hives and there's absolutely no honey left in there, that's a good sign of starvation. Poor queens, who knows? Weather, well, if you had a winter where it was -30 from November to end of March, perhaps that had something to do with it. And the Varroa and Nosema, those are diseases, or you had weak colonies when you went into the fall. Maybe your colonies weren't very strong, or other reasons, or don't know. And you'll notice that these figures are split between hobby and commercial. There's always, in the beekeeping community, there are some, we all work together, but there are sometimes at certain levels, some tensions. The commercial ones are in it for the making money and business, and they're interested in that any decision taken by the authorities support them, whereas the hobby ones may not be so focused on that and may have different interests. There are a lot more hobby beekeepers, of course, than commercial ones, but the commercial ones together have more hives, I believe. So starvation. It's pretty obvious. If you go into the winter with insufficient stores, your bees risk starving. They have to survive. Remember this: 7 months in their little boxes, never really getting out. And they have to have enough food in there to feed the thousands of bees that went into the fall. So from early November to the end of April, your hives will lose approximately 16 kilos of honey. So they should have at least 16 kilos of honey in there to start with, and even a bit more. Some of that honey may not be always accessible to the bees. If the external frames are full of honey, but it has been a cold winter, it may be difficult for the bees to access those external frames. As we near the spring, the weight loss increases. Can anyone venture a guess as to why this would be?
They're starting to get more energetic and burn more calories.
There's a bit of that, but there's another reason. We saw that in the population graph of the bees. We noticed how the population increases actually before winter ends. So actually it's February now, probably the queen is starting to lay eggs. In my hives, it could be -20 out there, but she's starting to lay eggs again. She may not lay that many right now, but she's going to pick up speed in the coming weeks. By the time March comes along, she'll be laying more eggs. And more eggs means more bees, more mouths to feed. So the amount of honey drops faster this time in the coming weeks. So starvation, I may have mentioned that earlier. Starvation often happens in March, even April. They're at the very last bits of their stores. The population is growing, and there's nothing outside yet to supplement that food. We talked about making sugar patties. Well, that's when you feed them sugar patties. The population is growing. So what is a sign that your bees are starved? Well, you'll open up your hives. First of all, there's no bees there are no live bees in your hive. You open it up, you might see this. This is on the left is a picture of a colony that is still alive, but it doesn't have much honey left. This is on the verge of starving on the left, and this one on the right is a sign that your bees have starved when they've all gone into the cells and have died in the cells like that. Usually that's a sign of starvation. Of course, and there's no honey around. That bees head down in cells. So what do you do to make sure they have enough stores? Well, in the fall you can eyeball it. You open up last time you open up your hives, you check to see the frames, are they all full of honey and nicely capped? You can quickly see. You take the outer cover off, the inner cover off. You pull out some frames, and if you see they're half empty in September, that's a terrible sign. And you can also weigh them. So a full 2-box brood colony going into the winter should weigh at least 45 kilos, or 1 box should weigh 32 kilos. You can use some equipment to weigh that. You have to be careful because either you weigh the whole thing at once, or you can weigh one side and the other side and find an average. There's ways of doing that. The one thing you don't want to do to look for if your colonies are ready for winter is for fat bees. Bees don't gain too much weight, so that's supposed to be a joke. So what do you do? Well, you have to feed them. What do you feed them? And we talked about this. Someone asked a question last class, how should you be taking that much honey? If you have to feed them, that's because you're taking too much honey away. And we discussed this for a few minutes, where you are taking honey off as a beekeeper. You're taking honey away from the honey supers and not from the brood chambers. But sometimes the bees will have empty frames in the brood chambers, yet they're filling the honey supers above before filling the bottom boxes. And that's not unusual. So you're going to take out, what you're going to do is take off your honey supers, maybe early 10th of September, depending on the year. And then there's still some flowers out. So the bees will still be working the goldenrod. And now they'll only be able to fill the brood boxes, any space there with honey. They won't be able to bring it back up to the honey supers because you will have removed them. But you can help them out because, you know, that time of year, it's not always that great. Help them out by feeding them. And then whatever you feed them, they will pack it quickly into their brood frames. But of course, as I just said, don't be tempted to take honey out of the brood boxes during the last harvest. They need it more than you do. You are tempted, especially the first year. You're going to realize you're putting your nukes and, you know, your bees made honey. They had to build a lot of combs, so they were busy doing that. And maybe you will not have harvested that much honey. And you're going to look in the brood chamber and you'll see a nice frame of honey. Oh, you're so tempted to take that. You want some honey your first year. So you have to resist that. Someone's raised a hand. Rick and Kat, go ahead.
Yeah, so what about, is it possible to use a top feeder during the winter, or is that freeze?
Yeah, no, you'll be wasting your time with that because it'll be very cold up there, very cold, right? So the bees, if it's below 7 degrees or 7 or 8 degrees, they're going to just kind of go into a coma, right, and die. So it'll be impossible to keep that mass of liquid sugar syrup, you know, it'll be 0 degrees, right? Even if you got the insulation going, there's just not enough heat being generated to keep that going.
Okay.
Adult bees require very little beyond carbohydrates to survive, right? They're already developed. They could use they do eat a little bit of the pollen mixture over the winter, but very little. They focus mostly on the honey. And since honey is almost pure carbohydrate, it's got some water and a trace amount of a variety of elements. That's why some people say honey is good for you. Well, honey is, I'm sorry to say, it's sugar. And, you know, as much as sugar is good for you, honey is good for you. As long as you don't eat too much, it's good. If you eat a kilo of honey a day, you'll probably get diabetes in no time. So but for the bees, it's okay. So what do? We feed the bees a concentrated solution of sugar water and allows them to transform it into sugar honey, and it completes their winter stores. So whereas nectar could be about 30% honey, I'm sorry, sugar. Nectar is about 70% water and 30% sugar, and honey is about 80%, or even we said 84% sugar. You feed them a sugar syrup that could be, by weight, it could be like 60% sugar. So you're helping the bees along here. You're giving them a solution that's almost honey, and they're just going to help. They're just going to transform it with a few enzymes. And then they're going to evaporate the water off of it, and then they'll be able to make some honey off of that. But never feed your bees before you take off your last honey supers, because if you do that, they'll be storing some of that sugar syrup. They'll be turning it into honey, sugar honey, into your honey supers, and you'll be extracting not nectar honey, but sugar honey, and that's a big no-no in the beekeeping world. Linda, you have a question?
Yep, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I just see the name. Okay, you're not Linda, obviously.
That's okay. It's actually Craig and Linda,
Right.
so that's okay. At the end of when you're removing your honey from the supers and last check, you know, if you find that there's an empty frame in the brood box, can you move one of those full frames down so that they, you know, you're sure they got honey? Is that okay?
Yes, that's a smart thing to do. It's a good observation and a smart thing to do. If you find that your brood boxes do have completely empty frames, you might put some full frames from some of your honey supers there. Yeah, you might want to try feeding them sugar syrup first, as much as you can, depending on the time of year. If it's early September, mid or late September, and maybe they'll fill it up quickly themselves, so you'll be able to keep that honey for yourself. But you might keep some of them on hand just in case. Yeah, good point.
Thank you.
So what do you do? Well, you know, this has always been a highly confusing thing for me, because people say, oh, mix it 1 to 2, 1 to 2, sugar, water, 2 to 1, 1 to 1. Like, you know what, 1 to 1 volume, weight, 2 to 1, is that 2 sugar to 1 water, or 2 water to 1 sugar? It's never really been clear. You can look online for better recommendations, but it boils down to 2 kilograms of sugar that you can dissolve into 1 liter of water. So that's 2 kilos of sugar to 1 liter of water, which is a kilo as well. And that at 15 degrees Celsius, that will dissolve, right? So maybe you remember your high school science. The warmer the water is, the more sugar you can dissolve in the same volume, right? So if that water is at 90 degrees, I could probably dissolve 3 kilos of sugar into it, right? But you don't be tempted to do that because you won't be giving your sugar water to the bees at 90 degrees. It's going to cool down to 15 or whatever. And if it does that, 1 kilo of sugar that you dissolve at 90 degrees will precipitate out of solution. It will just sink to the bottom of your feeding pan and will be not accessible to your bees. So don't try to push more than 2 kilograms of sugar into 1 liter of water. You can warm up the water and it dissolves better, but when it cools down to 15 degrees, you'll know that the sugar will still be in solution and the bees will have complete access to it. So how do you give that sugar to the bees? There are different ways. Here's what we call a frame feeder. So you remove a frame. So Craig, as the question you asked, you can pull a frame out that's already full of honey, set it aside. You can put it in a refrigerator, and then you can put one of these frame feeders in there, so the bees can take the honey, take the sugar syrup right out of that quickly. The frame works like a bucket. It's like a rectangular bucket. You fill it up with sugar syrup, and you slide this type of cover onto it, and the bees go down. There's a screen there with lets the water through, and they can lap it all up and bring it back into the frames and store it. And so this way that it's inside the hive, the syrup stays relatively warm. It's accessible only to the bees in that hive. So you want to really target a particular hive because it's weak, then you can use one of these. Some of the disadvantages is that it's a bit small. You might have to fill it up every day or two because the bees might be lapping it up very quickly, and you have to open up the hive to do so. And of course, it takes space normally dedicated to a frame, but if you remove the frame full of honey, then that's okay. Once you remove that, you can put your frame of honey back in. Here's another type of feeder. It's a hive top feeder. That's what I use. Why do I use that? I don't know. Somebody told me about it and I started doing that, and that's what I stuck to. And often that's what you do in beekeeping, right? This, I think, is a picture of my hives here. This is my inner cover. We were talking about the inner cover the other day. It's not just a flat inner cover, but it has a higher walls. You see that, right? Instead of just a board here. And I've got holes there with screens. So in the summer, the air circulates, so the honey can dry faster. But it's good for feeding with your hive top feeder. A hive top feeder is this rectangular bucket with a hole and a conical projection out of the center. It's got ribs around it and a little cap over it. So you fill this thing with sugar syrup. You put the cap over it so the bees can come through that hole in your inner cover over the cone, over the little ridges there, and start lapping up the sugar and bring it down again. So that's inside the hive, just like the frame feeder. It's bigger though. It could hold a lot more sugar syrup there, 5 liters. So if you've dissolved 10 kilos into 5 liters of water, that's 10 kilos of sugar you're giving to your bees there. That's quite a lot. So that's, if they lap a full one like that, that's very good. And they can often in the fall do 2 of them. And that should set you up if you already had a bit of honey stores in your brood boxes. Of course, if your hives are on an angle, they're not perfectly level. Sometimes all the syrup ends up in a corner. That's always a bit of a challenge, but that's up to you to make sure your hives are as level as possible. You can replenish this without opening up the hive. You just take off the outer cover, lift this little lid here, and pour your sugar syrup in there. It targets a specific hive like the frame feeder. But if it's cold out, you might, it's September. At night, it gets to be below zero sometimes. And that sugar syrup can get cold and the bees, it slows down the intake. Another way of feeding your bees is what we call a barrel feeder. Now, this is basically a barrel or a big bucket, whatever you have, that one or another makes the syrup available to the bees. In this case, it's flipped upside down, and the bees are actually getting at the syrup on the edges here. Some people actually use a big barrel and they put floating sticks in there, and the bees light on the sticks and take it up. So that's, it holds a huge amount. It can hold like, 100 liters or 150 liters of syrup. So if you got 50 hives, and you want to feed those bees, that's the greatest thing to use. Instead of having to go to every particular hive, you just have one of those in the field and they all go for it. Of course, you might be feeding your neighbor's bees too, and along with any other insect that finds it. And of course, if it's raining, they can't access it. So if you got the inner feeders, the frame or the hive top, and a rainy day, no problems. The bees are having a great time. But if it's this, no. So in September, you have a week of bad weather, you can't feed your bees this way.
Mark,
Yes, Pippa.
because I haven't figured out how to wave on the thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So you're talking, this is like a liquid food that you do in September, sort of October, but in the winter, if you want to feed them like sort of March, April, you use the sugar patties that you showed us before.
Yeah, I wouldn't say October. This is what you feed them in September. Yeah, unless it's been a particularly warm autumn, you could maybe just stretch feeding them into October with the hive top feeders or the barrel feeders. The sugar, the liquid syrup is typically what you give them in the fall. And I should have said, you just keep on feeding them until they stop taking it. They may stop taking it because they're full, they've got their hives full, or maybe the weather has turned bad and it's just too cold anymore. Yes, and in the spring you feed them, you feed them the patties when it's too cold to feed them liquid syrup. Even the hive top, we asked earlier, can you do this in the winter? No, because it's too cold, and it can be too cold well into March and into April too. So by the time mid-April comes along, it starts to get warmer, and you can feed them the liquid syrup again when they're starting to fly a bit. Otherwise, you want to feed them patties, and I don't know. I see pictures of people on the Facebook saying, "Yeah, I'm giving some patties to my bees," and it's February. It's minus 15 out there, and I'm thinking, the old timers, they tend to say you shouldn't open up your hives in the winter, no matter what, because you're going to cause them more stress by opening them up when it's in the middle of winter and putting a patty than waiting. If you have to be giving them patties in January or February, it's because they went into the winter with. You didn't feed them in the fall. You should have fed them in the fall, kind of thing. If you fed them well in the fall, you don't need to worry about them until March, April. So I hope that answers your questions there, Pippa.
Thank you.
So other causes of winter loss is that they go into winter with poor health, low numbers, and we talked about the poor queen, the diseases or whatnot. Well, I mean, that's why we talked about monitoring your bees throughout the summer on a fairly regular basis to make sure they're healthy, and you spot any issues and you try to deal with those issues before you arrive September and you've got a weak colony, right? So how do you do that? Well, as I just said, you monitor and you deal with these issues. You treat the diseases, or you strengthen weak hives, or you might monitor the queen if she's doing well. Otherwise, you might want to replace your queen. And monitor the population. A late swarm might reduce the population of a hive by critically low levels at the end of the season. And if that's the case, you might want to move frames that have brood from a strong hive into the hive that just lost bees due to a swarm. Or you can join 2 weak hives together, and I'll show you a quick little video on how to do that. I did that a couple of years ago. I joined 2 weak hives, and it worked out. I think I didn't have any problems. There's some hives, it's September, you're looking at them, you're thinking this hive will never survive the winter. I'm not even going to try. You can cross your fingers and feed them, but the population is not that strong. And maybe it has been performing poorly over the summer, and you're just going to lose it. So you might as well take that hive, take the 10,000 or so bees that might be in that hive, and combine it with another hive that is doing better, but not that strong either. So that other hive then will benefit from having a bigger population going into the winter. And I did that, and the combined hive I did survive the winter. And I'm pretty sure the hive that I took away would have died. So I think the next slide here is a little video, just to show you how that's done. By the way, you can't do anything in 60 seconds while you're beekeeping.
I'm going to show you how you can combine 2 hives. Maybe they're both weak, but together they'll make a strong colony. And you'll have to take the queen out of one side, maybe use her in another colony. You don't want to put 2 queens together. So I've got my queen down here. I don't have a queen over here, so I'm going to bind this deep. So we're going to do it in 60 seconds because I'm the 60-second beekeeper.
This guy's got a thing going.
Yeah. Virginia.
I'm going to lay a piece of newspaper over the top of this colony like this. And then I'm just going to go over here, and then you just come over here and lift this one up. But first, I have to make a few slits over here in the newspaper like this, just to kind of get the bees kind of sensing that there's some bees under them. Put your foot down, grab this one, lift it off, set it on top of the newspaper on the other colony like this. Try to square it up as best you can. And over a period of time, maybe a few days up to a week, the colony will begin to work through the newspaper and they'll be combined as one colony. There you go, how to combine two weaker hives to get them through the winter. I'm David Burns, the 60-second beekeeper.
There you go. So that was easy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I always figure out how to get out of these things. I'm just trying to get out of my video here. Let's see now. Here we go. So you saw the guy combining hives. It's pretty straightforward. By putting the newspaper, they'll chew through it, but during that time, they're going to get used to each other's scents, and they'll combine calmly. If you just put them without doing that, they might be aggressive with each other, so you don't want that. And you do have to make sure you get rid of one of the queens before you do that. So we saw the different reasons why there was some winter loss was poor weather. I tend to, is that right? Yeah, I call that a catch-all for bad management. Maybe, you know, oh, the weather was bad. It wasn't me. It was my fault, you know. And it's possible for sure if you have those cold winters where it's -30 from November to April. It's very hard on the bees. But you know, if you've done everything right before winter sets in, they should be okay. The weather shouldn't be much of a problem. Because the bees, they spend the winter like this. They all ball up in a tight cluster. They keep warm in the middle. They vibrate their wing muscles without moving their wings. It's kind of like shivering to generate heat. And to do that, they need to access honey stores, and they have to kind of move around in this funny space, right? It's not easy for them to move laterally, right? So they have to somehow move around. And if it's cold all the time, it may be hard for them to get to the honey on the edges, and then that might be a problem. So it is possible if it's too cold all the time, it will be hard on them. So what can you do about poor weather though, eh? What can you do? Beyond making sure they go into the winter with full stores of honey and a healthy population. Well, let's have a look. Well, you can talk about insulation and wrapping. And insulation and wrapping are interesting subjects, and there's widely varying opinions on this. And I'll give you mine. The important thing about insulation, when we use insulation in our houses, like for instance here, this picture of this, what do you call it? What's it called?
Fiberglass.
Fiberglass, right? We call it the fiberglass wool or something like this. It's not the actual fiberglass material itself that is helping keep the heat from escaping the house. It's the fact that this material is good at trapping air, still air between the inside of your house and the outside of your house. And still air that doesn't move is a very good insulator. So fiberglass does that well, wool does that well. It traps air inside. It doesn't move around, and the molecules stay in there. So the trick is still air. Same thing with double glazed windows. Between the two panes of windows, there's air in there, and it's a very good insulator. And so that's from my perspective, that's what we're trying to achieve when we want to help our bees survive the winter, by ensuring that there's spaces of still air between the cluster and the outside. So how do you do that? Well, here we have the still air. You want to make sure there's no drafts inside your hive. If there are drafts in there, if somehow the wind's blowing and it's getting in their hive, that's really going to be hard on the bees. How do you do that? Well, one is to keep your hives out of the blowing north wind. We mentioned that earlier. Don't put them in a bluff on a hilltop with the north wind coming right at them all winter long. That's not going to be good. Not only will that encourage drafts inside your hive, but it will rob any particular, even minor amounts of heat that is emanating from inside the hive will be robbed more quickly. So this person here has built a nice little windbreak, but you can put your hives in near bushes and whatnot. So try to keep the air inside still. And one way is keeping them out of breezes. But I guess I'm jumping around here, but one of the issues as well over the winter is to make sure your moisture inside the hive evacuates. You don't want to have rain, let's say, inside the hive, and I'll tell you how that happens. So bees, they will release water vapor when they metabolize the sugar they're eating. So they eat sugar and they turn that into CO2 when we exhale and water. So when we all exhale, we do the same thing as bees. We release CO2 and water. And what happens to warm water vapor when it is cooled down? Well, this picture kind of shows that. It condenses, right, into water, liquid water. And in a hive, where would this most likely happen in a hive? Where would the condensation take place, you think? Any guesses out there?
Around the lid?
Yeah, well, the lid, the roof, right? The ceiling, right? Because the hot, humid air would rise above the bee cluster. It would hit the ceiling. And if it's a cold day, that ceiling, even though it's insulated, might still be quite cold. And so you'll have the moisture condensing, maybe forming an ice layer up there. It's not unusual to open your inner cover on a cold winter day and see there's ice underneath. But what happens when it warms up? You get an unseasonably warm day in February. It could be +2 degrees or something. That ice would melt and it starts dripping on your bee cluster. Imagine you have your bee cluster. They're a bit stressed out because it's been cold and they've been there all winter long. Their bowels are full and it starts dripping water on a regular basis all over them. That's a sure recipe to, put them over the edge in terms of survival. So you got to try to evacuate that moisture. There's different ways, typically what happens in most hives, you have an upper entrance, right? So the air would circulate and slowly move out of the upper entrance. And this is a picture of my hives here, one of my hives here. You'll see it's getting ready for winter. I have down below, you see I have the entrance reducer in place. There's only a small entrance available right now to my bees. And this little notch in the inner cover, see the little notch there? That would be the upper entrance. So once that inner cover is placed, in line with the brood box, there would be a space for the bees to come in and out from that upper entrance. In the winter, also there would be some air circulation out of that upper entrance. So if I go to my hives today, if you look at my Facebook page, I took a few pictures in the past couple of weeks. You'll see pictures of little bees poking their heads out of the upper entrance here. They'll on a decent day, if it's 6, 7, or 8 degrees, they'll go out for little flights and come back in and evacuate their bowels. But also you might have a lot of frost gathering here because the humidity is coming out of here. That's very nice. But I think that this is not ideal because the humidity is not necessarily coming out of the side entrance. So here you need the humidity it kind of accumulates at the top here. So that's why I like to have this deep inner cover with the hole here. And in the winter, the humid air could evacuate out of this hole. Now, the challenge is you don't want to have a big wide open hole like that. In the winter, it'll be just too much. It'll be a total heat loss. So you have to somehow allow for some humidity and to evacuate without having a massive air current. So what I've done, and I've seen this, I learned this from other beekeepers. So here's a close-up of that inner cover with the walls. I cut a piece of rigid foam insulation, right over I snuggled it inside this high-walled inner cover, and there's a hole in the middle of my inner foam about the same diameter as this one, as best I could. It's not easy to cut round holes in this kind of stuff. And in there, in this particular picture, I've got a lot of pine needles. So what happens is there will be evacuation of humidity here, but on a relatively slow basis. There won't be a massive current of air. It'll slowly percolate up there through the pine needles and above there, where it will mostly condense or sublime is the proper word there when it goes from gas right to solid without going to liquid up around here. So that's the system I've been using for the past 5 years, and I haven't lost a hive in the winter yet. I can attribute that on one hand because when I see a weak hive going into the fall, I don't let it go into the fall. So, you know, it's like saying your students that are about to, you know, they're not good in class or having difficulties. If you just kick them out of your class, well, you're sure nobody in your class are going to fail. So that's kind of cheating to a certain extent. But on the other hand, the hives that I have overwintered have so far all survived. I don't think I'll have that success this winter. I have my doubts. And I think this helps. I was watching, and one of the videos I'm pointing to at the end of this presentation is by a guy who runs his beehives in Cochrane. If you know where Cochrane is, it's in northern Ontario. It's like halfway to James Bay. It's very far north. They have long winters there. And it's what he does as well. I know I was looking at his videos and he does exactly the same thing. So I felt vindicated to a certain extent. So that's what I do. What I do here then is I think I got a further slide where I show that I put newspaper on top, a little bit of newspaper, and I cover it with the inner cover. So what else you do to keep those breezes out? You have your entrance reducer, keep it very small so not much air can go in there, right? And you have a hive wrap. Now, there's different kinds of hive wraps, but they basically do the same. I looked at this, the R value, which is a measure of how well it insulates, is like 1.2. Now, the R value of this piece of wood here is 0.8. So it's not much better than just doubling up on your piece of wood in terms of insulation. So these wraps it's like going outside with a sweater on, right? If it's minus 20 outside, and you have no shirt on, you're going to be cold. You put a little light sweater on, okay, you'll be better, but you know, you'll just survive another 2 hours before you die, right? Anyway, it's not going to be enough to keep you warm. So this is along the same lines. It's not meant to keep too much heat in, but rather it's meant mostly to keep the breeze out. So when you put one of these on, it's very important to firmly attach it to the top and the bottom. I use a staple gun. I staple it all around so that there's no way a breeze can come in. Because in the fall, when you're opening up your hives for the last time, you might be treating them even in early December, late November with oxalic acid for your final varroa mite treatment. You're opening them up, and any propolis that the bees had used to block all the cracks, you've just cracked it all open. And when you put it back in, you know, at that time of year, they're not flying around to gather more propolis. So you've just created a whole bunch of little holes in their hive, and that's not very good. So these things help keep any stray breeze out. Oh yeah, here's a picture of the next step in my overwintering process. I put these bee cozies on. I've used duct tape and not, in this case, and not the staple gun to make sure there's no breeze. Over that hard insulation, I scrunched up some newspaper, and I've added another box, an empty box, and I put the lid on that. So and there's no air current in here, but the air coming out will just spread around the newspapers. And when I've opened this up in the winter, I've noticed the newspapers are all wet or full of ice. So there's a lot of humidity coming out of there. Those are my hives as well. And that's probably early April, end of March there. So, and I go back to the slatted rack. We've mentioned this piece of hardware before. It helps as well in ensuring no breezes inside the hive where the cluster is. So if you have this slatted rack above your bottom board and you put your entrance reducer here, you have just a small hole, and any winds and breezes coming through, they have to go underneath this bit here, and the wind arrives here, and the bees are further away, so there's less chance of a movement of air over the bees with the slatted rack. I've used them now. I like them, but you know, you might have some scientist who's done a careful study and will say, they're useless, those things, they make no difference. So, you know, it's how it is in beekeeping. It's good to try to get some scientific foundation for your decisions, but it's not always available. And snow, of course, is a great insulator. So it keeps the breeze out, particularly. So when you see if your hives end up looking like this, don't worry about it. The bees are just fine. What you don't want to do is shovel snow on top of your hives. If you do that, the snow will be too compact. You might actually stop any air circulation whatsoever, and they might die of asphyxiation under there. It's interesting that these hives seem to be placed in a wide open field. I don't see the whole picture here. It's quite wide open, but you see this person has put some bales of hay on the backside. See that? Again, try to keep the wind down. What do you see in front here? What's all this?
Dead bees.
Dead bees. It's totally normal. It's you don't be alarmed when you go see your hive in winter. There's a bunch of dead bees in front. They'll fly out, and some of them are smarter than others. The ones that are not so smart, or perhaps the ones that just can't hold it in anymore, and just say, "I've got to go. I just got to go. Let's just make a quick flight," and they don't make it, and they just plop down. That was at my hives last week. I think I told you that, right? I think. And the chickadees were there. The chickadees were eating all the bees on the snow. They're going down to pick one up and eating them. So that's it for overwintering. If there's any questions on that, we're going to move over to cleaning your equipment and moving on to the to the long winter. Yes, Pippa.
The pictures you're showing here, they're not wrapped, but surely if you wrap them too much, you can asphyxiate them. Like using the duct tape leaves no place. Like on your pictures, it looked like there's nowhere for them to breathe or for air to get in.
In my pictures, which is a very messy, not a very professional looking job here, but below the lower entrance is still up. The wrap doesn't go all the way down to the bottom board. So there's probably 1 centimeter of space, and then there's the bottom entrance, which is open. And over here, it's pretty messy looking, but the top entrance is also open.
Okay.
So there is a circulation there, and that's what you
don't want them airtight.
No, you don't. You leave the bottom entrance and the top entrance open, so you have that air circulation. Good point.
I figured you did.
Yeah. Greg, you had a question?
I do. Most of the pictures that you have are all going into the winter with 2 brood boxes. What's your opinion on going into the winter with just a 1 brood box, like I see a lot of people do?
Yeah, it's people are doing that. Some people are doing that. I don't know. Based on my unscientific observations, of the discussions I'm seeing online, I get the impression it's quite a minority, maybe 5%. But they'll say it works well. They do well. 1 brood box, it's a lot easier to be checking for your queen. You don't have to rifle through 20 frames. You just have to rifle through 10 frames. There's a lot of advantages to that. Some people say, well, it's a long winter, and 1 brood box, you could be really running on the edge there in terms of are they going to starve or not. They do need so much honey for the winter, so it's something you have to take into consideration. So as is the case for most things in beekeeping, and people do it in all different ways, and it goes back to the fact that bees know how to take care of themselves, and they'll try to figure it out no matter what you do to them. And as long as they don't have rain and falling on them, there's a chance they'll survive. And they go into the winter with their full stores. So your call. Just pointed out that these boxes are not wrapped at all, right? No wraps whatsoever. That's it. And you'll see some people, they're going to build the most elaborate insulations for their hives. They got a lean-to shed with 3 walls. They got the bales of hay on the top, all around them. They got a little tunnel here for the upper and lower entrance, right? It's, whatever you want to do, that's great. My observation is that it's not necessary. As a beekeeper, sometimes you'll want to do things for yourself more than for the bees. Feel like a good parent. I've done all I could. I've gone over above and beyond. You'll sleep better at night. You won't feel so guilty. What's that? Anyway, so there you go. So you've put your bees away. It's snowing. There's not much you can do. Now you look at your shed and it's full of equipment, dirty, messy equipment, and you can do nothing, or you can go out there and start cleaning things. And it's good to give them a good clean once a year at least, or every couple of years at the very least. Over the summer, the bees will put comb everywhere and propolis everywhere. And the more there's that stuff on your equipment, the harder it is to inspect your hives, to pull out frames and whatnot. So it's a good thing to keep that clean. It all involves scraping, and a lot of scraping. My wife and I spent, I think, a day and a half last October scraping. It's fun. You put the radio on, and it's a good way to spend a few hours together. So you're removing all burr comb and propolis. Burr comb is any comb that is located where you don't want it. You call it burr comb. It's like any plant that grows where you don't want it is a weed. So here's a picture of some nice fresh burr comb on a new hive. This is a different kind of hive. There's a lot of frames in there, but pictures just to demonstrate the burr comb. So as you're working in the summer, you can, with your hive tool, you can scrape some of that off from time to time just to keep it under control. Yeah, and here's propolis too, the same kind of thing. It'll get everywhere, gummy, and it gums things up. It's sometimes crystallized, it's hard like a rock, like candy, or sometimes it's gummy like old chewing gum. Makes it hard to remove things, clean as you go. Propolis can be a valuable product, and you can put things in your hive that encourage the bees to make more propolis, because they use it to plug holes in things. So you put these panels, it's full of little holes, and they'll plug it, they'll fill it up with propolis. And you could extract that and remove the propolis. You can be a propolis harvester and sell that, and you know, make a few extra dollars. Your cleaner gets all gummed up. You know, I have never cleaned my smokers. It's getting pretty bad. Little hole in the top's getting pretty small, so this is something I'll have to do. And you know, this is a kind of I put the slide in just to illustrate to you how beekeepers tend to be, you know, putterers. They all invent new things to make life easier, and sometimes the process invention and building is 10 times more requires 10 times more effort than what it is. And for instance, this person here,
Down here.
I had the so I hear someone's mic there. I had the this past summer, as I said, fall we spent a day and a half scraping, and it makes a big mess. Everything falls on the floor. So I really appreciated this when I saw it in the Ontario Beekeepers Association magazine. Some guy built this contraption. It's a big funnel, a wooden funnel that the dimensions are just perfect for this. You could lean a box on it, and you can scrape away on this box. Everything falls down the funnel into a collector box down below. It's very clean instead of having it fall all over the floor. My wife and I, we put a big tarp on the floor. It was all over the place. This is what this person has invented. There you go. That's just one out of thousands of things you could do as a beekeeper if you're handy and like to do these kinds of things.
So Mark,
yes.
got a question on the cleaning the frames there.
Yeah.
Can you take the plastic part there and just throw them in the dishwasher?
Whoops, the plastic part. Which
Yeah,
plastic part?
The yellow where the comb gets built up on.
I'm just trying to think. The frame, you mean?
Yeah, if you take the frame, it's got the, you know, they come with the plastic, the yellow.
Oh yeah, the foundation.
Foundation, yeah. Can you just throw that in the dishwasher?
Well, by the end of the season, those foundations will be full of comb, right? The bees will have built comb on that. So you don't want to, you want to, those are very precious. You don't want to disturb those. You don't want to destroy those. So you keep those, you put them right back in the hive. You keep them in the hive. And no, you don't want to put them in the dishwasher. You want to preserve the comb that's built. Over a period of 3 or 4 or 5 years, the comb will get dark, especially the brood comb. And then you want, and then last year, I tried trying to do something with that. It's a very black wax, and it gets all gummy, and you scrape it off, and the foundation behind it's all black. It's very messy, and I decided just to throw all that away. It's not very easy to deal with. Even trying to extract the wax, you can do it. You can extract the wax, but it's 90% waste and 10% wax, and it's a very messy job. But I would never put anything in your dishwasher because it's going to gum your dishwasher up, right? You're looking at melted wax inside your dishwasher. It's going to start sticking on everything. So never do that. Did I answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, we'll do it when the wife's not around. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we were so this is the final bit of this tonight's lesson. It's almost 10 to 6 here. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on learning, because beekeeping is learning all the time. You're always a beginner, and as people always asking questions, you're asking questions on the Facebook groups. There's one guy who runs a commercial operation. You know, he has lots of hives near Renfrew. He sells equipment and nukes, but he goes on. He asks these questions like, "Oh, should I, open this up?" Or simple questions. You think a person like that would know everything, but No, just always, you're always trying to gather more information on best practices. So never be afraid to ask questions. Even the old timers are asking questions, and people are always helpful. In the beekeeping community, it's amazing that people are helpful and keen on learning from each other. So you can be part of that. You're also lucky to be doing this or getting into this at the absolute best time in the history of, in the 200,000 year history of humanity or whatever it might be. You're at the apex. What luck, with all the resources available to you. And I'm going to give you some at the end of this presentation. It's the easiest time in history to get into beekeeping. So these are some resources here, and I'm going to just quickly go through them. OMAFRA, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Rural Affairs for Ontario, they have best management practices for winter preparation. It's worth a look. Wrapping hives, this is the man in Cochrane, Scott Hendricks. This is a 15-minute video. I think he runs about 40 or 30 hives up there, and he does these very nice videos. You know, they're not like all slick Hollywood videos, but they're informative. The pace is just right. And in this particular one, he shows how he wraps his hives in Cochrane with just like, what's it called, Tyvar? That's kind of the vapor barrier paper they put on houses when they're building houses. It's like wax paper, like parchment paper, nothing more than that. There's no insulation value whatsoever. It's all about cutting the breeze down. And he's in Cochrane, so you should know. Here's one about installing that Bee Cozy, that black thing. It's a commercial advertisement there, but I get no kickbacks here, but I just thought they did a good job to show you how to do it. University of Guelph about feeding bees in the fall and how to overwinter them. Whoops, what are we doing here? This is interesting. A person in one of my classes a while back asked about overwintering them indoors. So I knew nothing about that, so I couldn't answer the question. So I went and looked, and it's amazing. This is a 6-minute video, but it shows how complicated it is. You think you just put them in an unheated garage or whatever and just walk away, but no, you have to be careful of the CO2 levels in there, the light. If you can't have any light in there, so you have to be. It's quite an operation. And there's something in French in case you want to see that in French. So you guys now have all it takes to start. There's no more excuses. And I hope you're ready to jump off the deep end. And if you are, part of the deal taking this course was that you get a discount on buying some equipment. And I don't know if I mentioned that, but when I was organizing this course, I looked around, shopped around to see if any supplier would be willing to give a discount to my students. And my objective there was to give my students a greater incentive to take the course. If the price of the course is equivalent to the discount you get, well, taking the course ends up being for free if you get into beekeeping. So I thought that'd be good for for me as well. And I found the Dancing Bee. They're located, I forget now, I think Napanee or something like that. And they'll give you a small discount on a deluxe beginner beekeeping package. And so what does that mean? This is what you get. You'll get a bottom board. You get 2 brood boxes. You get a queen excluder. You get 1 honey super. You get, there should be an inner cover there and an outer cover. I don't see an inner cover there, but there should be one. Oh, sorry, this is the inner cover. It's a deep inner cover, like the kind I have. You can just see the upper entrance notch right there. You get a whole full bee suit with gloves. You get the outer cover. You get all the frames. So you get 10, 20, 30 frames. These are mediums. These are deeps. You get a hive tool. You get a smoker. Everything you need to get going except the bees. And that's, on their website, the last time I looked, it was $395.95 or almost $400, and they were going to give you $20 off of that. Plus, the lady said she'd give free shipping, so you don't want to go drive all the way over there to pick it up. She'll ship it to you, and that's the equivalent of about the price of this class. So there you go. And let me know by email if you need this, because what I do, the way it works is just so that it's not anybody who is going to her and saying, "Oh yeah, I took Mark's class." I send her an email copying you. And I say, Massimo wants to buy one, and then you talk to her directly, and you finish your deals with her. You might buy other stuff, and I don't receive kickbacks. I want you to know the margins aren't that big anyway for this kind of thing. So there you go. So if you have decided to get into beekeeping for this spring. Number one, order a nuke, at least, or the mini nuke is unique, because now's the time. We spoke about this, and get your equipment. This equipment is shipped, not assembled, but it's pretty easy, right? You see what it's just like, what do you call it? Not quite dovetail, but a simple kind of dovetail. You just bang them together, and then you might use at least some nails, if not screws, in there to make sure it's nice and tight. You want to paint them with an exterior paint, could be white, off-white, yellow, or whatever, and then you're all set. You need to buy your nuke. Any questions about that? No?
Yes, I have a question. Sorry. So the top cover here with the top entrance that you have.
The inner cover, yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering about, do you want them just going in there? Is that there for ventilation or?
Well, in the summer, the bottom entrance is much bigger, right? And you're having a busy hive. This is way too small to get a hive going in the summer. There's too much traffic, right?
Right.
It's good to have some circulation. The bees are trying to evaporate the water out of their honey in the summer. And so while they don't need a hole up there, they can, they'll be down here fanning, like we saw the other day. They'll be out there fanning to get air circulation going. If you have a bit of air circulation through the top, it doesn't hurt. It'll more air circulates on nice days, particularly, the more that nectar will evaporate into honey. So the upper entrance is always a good idea. I've noticed that some of my hives in the winter, because in the winter, the snow starts to melt, and there might be a lot of snow down below, and they're using, by the time April comes along, you have some nice days, they're using the top entrance and not the bottom entrance. So that's, but then next thing you know, it's May, it's warm, they're still using the top entrance. This is wide open, but I got thousands of bees trying to get in and out of this tiny little hole, and this is a problem for me. So I would go at night and I would put a piece of duct tape over the hole. So they have no choice to find the bottom entrance. So it takes them a while to flip from the top to the bottom sometimes, but not all of my hives did that, just some of them. Just to illustrate to you that every hive behaves differently, and as a beekeeper, you have to kind of try to figure out how to deal with it. Does that
So I
answer?
was thinking about using a cover with that Quebec Escape on
The Quebec, sorry?
the Quebec Escape thing
Yeah.
on that cover, so that they could only go in there, they couldn't come out. Is that-
So, but I see on the top here, right?
yeah.
But
Oh, you put the Quebec Escape where the super is, right? Where the honey super is?
Quebec Escape is when you want to extract your honey, right? So you'll put it, if you only have one box of the queen, yeah, you'd put it above the queen excluder, so that when it's time to extract the honey, you put it below the honey super and the queen excluder, and then you leave it there for the night. And the bees here would all go down here at night. In the daytime, they can't move back up. So you're going to remove your honey super
Yeah.
without any bees. Yeah, the queen escape is used just temporarily for one night or 2 nights a year. You don't use it as a type of entrance.
Okay.
Yeah. So Craig, you had a question as well? No, yes, Craig?
I did. So you have in your winter setup, your deep inner cover, you have screened and an insulation that you've described.
Yeah.
Have you then drilled a hole in the highest,
Yes.
the
in
top
inner
brood
cover?
box?
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
did. I drilled the holes here. I bought one once with holes already done, so I've some, you go to beekeeper supply people. Where are you located, Craig?
In Napanee area,
Oh, there you go.
Caladar, Northbrook.
You
Yeah.
can go talk to those people at Dancing Bee, and they'll probably sell you with some with holes already drilled, and some beekeepers don't use that stuff, whatever, and you may not want to put holes in, but 1 hole or 5 holes, whatever, right? There's
So
no,
that's for ventilation. Did you also drill a hole in the top, in the highest level or the top brood box for an entrance then?
sometimes, and one of my hives, I did that, you can drill a hole here as well,
Right.
and
Okay.
and you can buy these little metal discs, you can turn the disc so that the hole is wide open, so the bees can come and go, or you turn it again, it's like a screen, the bees can't come, but you get air circulation, or you turn it again, it's completely blocked. It's like anything, right? You buy this deluxe kit, you can get bees and you're going to have honey. Oh, but then you might want to have this and that, and the slatted rack and the hole blocker and the this. Next thing you know, you're going crazy. So it's up to you to decide how far you want to go with this, right? Yeah, and it's you experiment. You experiment. It's, as I said, the bees are very forgiving. You can put a hole here or a hole over there or a hole on the back, and they're still going to make honey. They're still going to go at it.
And the last question I have for you then is regards to what the University of Guelph does instead of a solid inner cover, they use a piece of canvas. Have any experience with that at all?
I don't know. And, they probably know what they're doing better than I do. So maybe the canvas is a bad idea. The canvas has no air circulation though.
Yeah, I mean, they're a bee research facility, but just that don't mean that it's best for everybody. I understand. I think I'm going to we've got ourselves set up for 2 hives.
Great.
I think I'm going to try and take one into the winter with a single brood box, and I'll take the other one into the winter with a double brood box. I'm going to see how each of them manages.
Well, it's a perfect hobby if you're the tinkerer. You want to experiment and see how things go, and that'll give you an idea. Although you could say scientifically, you'd probably have to go through the winter with 100 singles and 100 doubles to get an average and statistically significant results.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're a biology background, I hear?
Yeah, a long time ago, I did a biology degree.
Yeah, me as well.
Oh, great. So you can appreciate, it taught me to appreciate a bit thinking critically about things and the value of results, right? If one hive and you get this, well, maybe there's so many factors. Which one of them is, how can I really attribute this particular outcome by having done this or that? Because any beehive has many different things going on, right? In terms of the queen, the genetics, the queen health, have they swarmed? So it's hard.
My goal is to see which one is easier to manage. That's where I'm going to start. Yeah.
Let's before I get into all the questions and answers, let's just finish the last slide here. This is, I think, the last slide. These are longer term resources that you might want to keep an eye on for the rest of the winter. There's Facebook communities. I know not everybody's on Facebook. I have found them very, very good, especially the beekeepers of Eastern Ontario and Western Quebec. A lot of members, very helpful. Then there's the Ontario Beekeepers Association. That's an association if you want to, have a more structured grouping of beekeepers. You can become a member. You get a magazine, which is kind of neat. The manual here, I find, is pretty nice manual. I thought it's a bit pricey for what you get, but that's if you want to have something that's in your hands as opposed to online, I recommend it. And there's in Quebec they have their association as well. A lot of that's the inventory of all of U of Guelph's videos. They're all fantastic. So perfect to do COVID at home or watch those. I see Craig and Linda. This is a team effort here. That's great. Again, this guy in Cochrane, Scott Hendricks, he also has a lot of great videos to give you a different perspective. University of Guelph may say something, he may say something else. And I had someone from BC on a previous course, so I added that in as well. So there you go. Those are great resources. I'll be sending you, of course, this after the class. And that's the